You ever wonder how many advertisements you happen to see in just one 24-hour period of time that you're actually awake for hopefully maybe only 16 or 18 and sometimes 19 or 20 hours in the day? Well, it's probably about 4,000 according to the Forbes Advertising Council. And if you think about that number, it's pretty exhausting. It's easy to see and notice that we live in a very saturated media society in which majority of those messages are advertisements to us. So I hope that you're enjoying the class. This is our first chapter that we've had a chance to really dive into in discussion about the introduction to advertising course. So as you know, I'm Mr. Molina. I'm your instructor for the semester for this class. We're going to dive right into the evolution of advertising. And so we'll try to capture some of the main items that we're discussing in this particular first module. So let's move right into it. So if we think about it, when we discuss the history, we are looking at the evolution of advertisement messages and how it relates to our economic evolution as a capitalistic economic system that we live in America. So in the Western world, obviously, we know a bit of our history. We know that there was a huge slave trade. There was a tobacco trade. There were trades of very textile products from ancient times, even before the modern capitalistic economic system existed in a Western culture and a Western society. But some of the first ideas about advertisements are so married to some of the first media messages that our society would facilitate to one another to ensure that we were heavily informed about our political leaders, our religious leaders, in just a way in which we can be also entertained. So the first ad agencies that really existed were at a time where the Industrial Revolution began. And the thing about these ad agencies is that they were coupled with leadership of Benjamin Franklin, who founded one of the first newspaper networks in our new colonies in the New World. And so these ad agencies would simply serve as the financiers for much of the new way of receiving information and delivering it, distributing it. So it was easy to see these advertising agents married strictly to the newspaper industry, which if you study mass media, we find that the ability to move information to and from the colonies allowed us to have a huge advantage on the British Empire and an ability to swap information, to send people on horse to deliver messages, which gave birth to the U.S. postal system. It allows us to facilitate that information. And then as we developed the newspaper industry, we developed space brokers, which is what the advertising agents were. They were a way to facilitate the idea of brands and product, which we'll see here in the next couple of slides. So as you can see, some of the major things we're going to discuss is the evolution. So we'll look at the past, some of the present stuff that's happening with advertisements and how they've sort of morphed in the digital age, and what we have for the future. So the advertising age of the 1800s, right, consisted of very textile products. Right, these were products that initially weren't really meant to serve as nothing more than just a simple necessity, right? We're talking about soap. We're talking about coal to heat your home, right? Before the electric industry, right? The ability to provide taste to your food, and just essential items like oats and wheat and barley, and even oysters, which were oftentimes seen as advertisements in some of the early newspapers you saw in Boston. Okay, so these advertisers were aiming for distinctiveness and for quality. in their brand. And so the brand identity is really what gave birth to the advertising industry and gave it purpose, right? Because otherwise we would just buy, products, household products that really didn't have a brand name. So this is where the art form began to meet the copy, which is what we'll be talking about as well. So consumers began to learn these products by name as we enter into the industrial revolution and into the age of capitalism. So advertising in the 1800s also consisted of early brands such as Quaker Oats, as you see here, and Campbell's Soup, which still exists today. And they allowed for that special product quality to be identified within the actual brand name, and it built trust with the customers and the people that they were marketing to. So moving on, we also see in the 1800s that most of the advertisers, over 20% of them, were actually from department stores, which we obviously know now it's sort of a poetic justice that a lot of these are brick and mortar stores that are struggling due to the digital revolution we're in today and the rise of Amazon, if you will. So Sears, Macy's, J.C. Penney, right, were some of the early advertisers and pretty much what you typically would see in a print medium such as the newspaper or a magazine. And as we move further into the 1900s, into the age of the World War I and II era, where the promotion of nationalism and to build our national security and our military were heavily present with the birth of the Ad Council, whereas today we see, particular public service announcements from the Ad Council to stay home, wear a mask, that sort of thing in the age of COVID-19. Whereas in the past, they also played a strong role in the development of our military. And so as you can see, some of the iconic posters that were distributed across society in America to support war bonds and to support the war itself and to support women's movements and women's rights. So as you can see, these also are considered advertisements because they have turned your attention to a certain cause, a product or service, whether that be an abstract idea like a service or the product itself. Okay, so moving in, we also see the rise of creative works in publications through the use of photography, through the use of art, to then embed itself within the advertising world. Because as we began to build more opportunities for messaging that was mass messaging, including the radio, television, as we see these are some of the early Volkswagen advertisements of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, as we would see the merging of what we consider copyright, okay, like messaging, think small, which are your captions of the old days, and the merging of that with the art. And so this has been a very successful campaign for Volkswagen, which I'm sure we'll do some studying further on them. But as you can see, they've sort of stuck with the formula, and this being a more recent merging of copy and art example from Volkswagen. So some of the trends in modern advertising as we move into the present, as you can see, we have obviously numerous ways to receive an advertisement message. And so the integration and the synergy between companies and organizations has created these several touch points in advertisements where we're not just being bombarded for one particular movie like Star Wars, but it's also to maybe enhance the career of a particular person, like a celebrity or somebody that's on social media. So some of the trends are pretty much the integration. All right, we also see the personalization of our advertisement experience, and most of us would usually recognize this particular image, which basically it implies that we live in a bubble. And most of the advertisements and or media messages that we receive, whether they be sports related, political related, or even consumer related are all within this bubble, which is really an example of our digital footprint, right? So if we like sports, probably going to see more Gatorade commercials or Nike commercials. If we like the arts, we'll probably get more advertisements for the Tobin uh, Theater as we see that opening back up as well. So the personalization is high. There's also, again, the integration of other marketing tactics that you see, which is related to word of mouth. And so, in order for word of mouth to actually work, we have to actually tell others. And so, sometimes these mediated events happen on purpose, such as this example of Pharrell Williams wearing a hat that resembles the Arby's logo at a Grammy Awards show that was probably aired on CBS. And Arby's, which is the subsidiary to PepsiCo, which probably in some way, shape, or form had created this event in an effort to boost the online experience and engagement with Arby's on its Twitter profile. This is a great story if you haven't checked it out out on the web, and it's a great little case study as well to emphasize the trends in modern advertisements. Also, too, we saw in the last World Series about a year ago where someone who was just carrying two Budweisers just by chance caught a home run ball with his chest. And this is another example of how viral events happen. They're recorded, and then they usually end up on social media and become a trend or a hashtag or something like that. And so we're dealing with multiple channels, and the marketer is taking full advantage of that because the more eyeballs they can get on this experience that obviously involved a company and a product, then they're going to try to take advantage of that. So it's a lot of fun studying advertising. I hope that you'll tune in further and be looking at some of the other examples that you obviously will see in our society and in our media. Today we were just having a chance to look at the past, present, and future of advertisements and the evolution of it. One of the biggest things that we'll be looking at is in the future, what many are predicting is already happening, is what's called surveillance capitalism. And it's a concept that is drawn up by a professor in the Harvard Business School, and she goes by the name of Shoshana Zuboff, and she has a book that is entitled it's surveillance capitalism and how the algorithms that are in play within our devices and so forth are really telling the tape of what needs to get advertised to that specific person, and it's a very precise way to do so, and some would argue that it's an infringement on our privacy. There's also a PBS story that is done. It's a frontline special about surveillance capitalism, so we'll be probably diving into that as well. Thanks for joining me, and we'll see you soon.